All right, this video is a quick overview of what the technology staff development team shared during the mobile learning showcase in October. One of the first examples we shared was from a sports marketing class where they used the Pages and Keynote apps, right, to create visual representations of advertisements. A teacher before had gone to the computer lab and used Photoshop to do these, and they had to spend several days like learning Photoshop. But Pages and Keynote have some really easy photo editing ability to remove backgrounds and crop and overlay, right? And so the students were able to create these sort of unique advertisements on their iPads in the classroom without having to book a computer lab, without having to learn a complicated program, but still have the same learning outcome, right? So it's a substitution of what they used to do before, and iPad in this case had just made this easier, and they could spend more time focusing on the actual product and the learning rather than on the program. The next example comes from ThingLink. Now, ThingLink is actually a website and an app, so it's accessible both through the iPad and through the computer. ThingLink allows you to set your background. So in this instance, this person had set the background as a map of New York. So this is a map of where The Great Gatsby takes place. Each of these interactive bullseyes, right, is a pop-up window that gives you some information about that location. These red circles with the little mountains in them are actually photos, and you can add text to the photos, right? And so all of these basically become pop-ups. It creates an interactive image. Now the background could be anything, right? So it could be a map, it could be a text, right, that you're adding information to. It could be an image of the human body in anatomy and physiology, or a geographic landscape in another discipline, or an MCL classroom. It certainly could be a detailed map of a city where you're outlining different things and that are found in that foreign city. That's ThingLink. Just another little example of how somebody took an image and added just a little bit more text. These are then shareable, so you can actually either turn them in as the final product or share them with the class, right, to have them explore other students' work and learn about that. Here's another example of a sort of a higher level map, ArcGIS. It's a geographic information system. Susan Holderried sort of has the ability to kind of teach you a lot more about this, but you can add lots of different layers to the map. You can add tons of information. So in this case, added in houses in Winnetka that had teardown permits. But you can download historic data, so it's not just data you create and you make. You can actually download geographic data and put it in so the students can make it. So if you're interested, please see Susan Holderried about this. She has a lot more information. Next example comes from literature and film, and this is just a simple example about turning a graphic novel, right? So you can see images from a graphic novel. But what's unique about this is that the student was able to rearrange and edit the images, put them in an order that he wanted to support his argument about a character development. So the student was arguing about how a character developed throughout the course of the graphic novel. And in this instance, by rearranging the images and being able to see them in color and work with them, manipulate them, he was able to then sort of illustrate his point in the paragraph that you see, a part of his paper that he wrote in the bottom. This can be done in PDF Expert. Certainly could also be done in Pages as well on the iPad. This example just comes from the library. An app called DocScan allows students to take pictures of anything, right? Any pages, periodicals, newspaper articles, magazines, books that are set in the library that you can't remove because they're being used in lots of different classes, right? Take a picture of it, it knows the edges, it turns into a PDF. Now students have it on their iPads to curate it. Whether they choose to then print them later, that's always a possibility, but it allows them to curate. The Documents app, it's a free app out there made by the same company that makes PDF Expert. It allows you to open up a web browser within the Documents app and then, right, turn any web page into a PDF. So if that web page is a huge document or a huge amount of research or a journal article, right, you can then turn that into a PDF, store it in the Documents app, curate all of this wonderful data. You can even highlight and take notes on it if you'd like to, but you also can just curate tons of them and then choose, if you want to print 3 or 4 out that you're then going to use for your final paper. But it's a great way to curate information from any website, including library databases. The next example comes from English classroom, right? So reflecting on texts and reading strategies in order to encourage students to read more purposely. So this is actually an example of something they did after a summer reading. So if you look at this image where it says, "Boy has hope for dad," was the only thing this student wrote on this page over the summer for summer reading. After sort of being taught about how to annotate, right? This student then went back, took a screenshot of the book, right? Took a picture of it, brought it into PDF Expert, and then added the red, right? And now the red is where what they should have said, right? Based on the new information they've gotten from the teacher about how they should be annotating text. And then the bottom paragraph is just a reflection of why they should have added all of these extra annotations. So it's a neat way. Here's another example of a student who did it with typing on the outside and then arrows drawing into the text. And you can see sort of the handwriting just on the page on the side, again, with a reflection. So it's not just the ability to add in additional highlights, but having on the same page as the reflection allows both the student and teacher to better move between what was annotated and the reflection to better illustrate their learning. This is a 3D timeline app. I'm going to play just a bit of it for you here.
Overview of the 3D.
But it's an app that allows you to create timelines that are three-dimensional. Kind of show you here just a few bits and pieces of it. I'm not going to spend as much time as I would have in the showcase. But it allows you to add events. Okay, very easily. It's very intuitive. If you notice, if you want to add media, click Add Media. You add a start date, an end date, and it creates a really neat opportunity to create timelines on an iPad. And the reason you might do this rather than on paper is you can add images, you can add audio, you can add video, and then in the end, you can export it as an interactive timeline that students can look, or you could export it as a PDF. And the nice thing about that is even though the PDF might technically be 6 feet long if you print it out, when you bring it into PDF Expert, it's just one page. So you can zoom in on one side and zoom in on another side. So there's an example of sort of adding an image. I'm going to skip forward here in a second to show you the end product. So here's what an end product would look like. All your images and dates, you tap on one, it brings the image and the text associated with it to the front. You could then tap on the images again to make them bigger if you needed to. But again, it's an opportunity sort of, again, to make a timeline, and you could then export it out if you wanted to. This is another example of creating Facebook pages for historical or fictional characters. If I click here on Facebook, it's going to open up a Facebook page for Franklin D. Roosevelt that was made as an example. And this is both an iPad, available on the iPad or via the web. And as you notice, in order to create a Facebook page for either a historical character or a literary character, right, you'd have to know a lot, right, about them, right? This stuff's pretty easy, maybe to research, right? But understanding, who their friends would be, right, takes a little bit more insight. Who's in their families, what kind of photos might they have, right? If they had a photo gallery associated with them, what kind of photos would they have there? Who would be in the photos? Obviously, time period matters. But the timeline is interesting because you could have conversations going back between them, like who would they have talked to, right? And who would have posted on their website? And how would they have spoken? What kind of language would they have used? So just some different opportunities here to expose students to having to really think about characters in new ways. Kahoot is a pretty fun game, as you can see here. So here's a question, right? When did our department adopt the name modern and classical languages? So this is what would be displayed by the teacher, right? They created, it's a lot, just like a clicker game. And then this would be what would be displayed on the student's iPhone or iPad, right? So they have to then not only know the answer, but then match it up to the right color and touch it And it works a lot like you would expect, sort of a fun game that you might see at Buffalo Wild Wings, right? Where the longer you take to answer it, the less points you get. So it starts out at 1,000 points, and then it starts going down to 959, 850, 757, right? So it's a race to not just know the answer, but to know the answer in speed. It creates a fun game atmosphere between each question. It updates your points, shows you who's in first and second and third place. So it's kind of a fun way to do a review game. There's been a lot of people doing this in the MCL department and the science department since the Institute, and there's been a lot of great feedback from students using this. PicCollage is an app that allows you to make collages, and you can see an example here, right, of one student that did it over photos from their vacation. You can do this in Pages as well to add in and add some text. But the nice thing about PicCollage is it has some of the templates in there that make it a little bit easier to use. Edpuzzle is another example of a website that allows you to take videos from any of these sites. So YouTube, Khan Academy, TED, National Geographic, or you could upload your own video. Once it's associated with Edpuzzle, you can add your own additional audio. So for example, I had a video in my anatomy and physiology class that I used from Khan Academy. There were 3 or 4 points along the way where the person on Khan Academy, right, Khan, he was using some words I didn't quite know. I paused the video, added 30 seconds of my own voice, right? It recorded it right there, so the video actually paused. The students then get to hear my voice, and then it continues to play right after that. You also can add discussion questions and multiple choice questions at any sort of point along the way. And what that means is that students would see, right, as you see down here, there are question marks, right? As the video is going along, when it gets to one of the question marks, the video stops. You then have to respond, right, to the question and answer it. And you can't go on in the video until you submit an answer. And you can do both free response or you could do a multiple choice. It's a great way to keep kids engaged as they're watching maybe videos at home or videos in class. I actually did it as a sub-plan. Book Creator is an ebook tool. So it creates an EPUB that can be read through iBooks on the app, on the iPad. It allows you to add video and audio and images as well as text. It's neat because the audio recording's right in there. So you could even record different pieces of the text. So if students are having a hard time reading something, you could make it particularly for lower level students or our English language learners, right? We could have actual text reading, or you could have, in this case, students create a book that they then share out to the class. So it's neat that they can design it and they can bring in lots of different pieces, including video, audio, and images. Just an example of another student-created book. This one is a little bit more advanced in terms of its functionality. It's using iBook Author. iBook Author is available on all the Mac computers in the computer labs. And so as you can see, students can add text, they can add images, they can again add videos, they can add interactive questions. So these are some interactive multiple choice questions you saw right there. And interactive images where you touch on something and it actually zooms in for you, or in this case, reveals more information about the nucleus, right? So it's a neat program. Learning curve is not that bad. My students were able to learn it in about 10 minutes and then spent the rest of the time doing that. Here's an example of a teacher who created an iBook Author or a textbook using iBook Author, again in literature and film. So here's an ability for a teacher to embed a video right in the text, right, where they can point out things they want their students to notice, and the video actually plays right next to it. So it's a message from the teacher. Pay close attention to the role of sound in this scene, and they get to hit play because that's actually a video right there from Contagion. Same thing about framing. So you see some information about framing. On the next page, you then see an image about framing, and then again, notice the hands in the tie are to the left and below the middle of the frame. The subject's eyes are above the middle of the frame. Right? So they're telling you what to look at. You hit play. It then goes ahead and plays. Thanks for listening to this video. Hopefully some of these ideas will give you options. If you're interested in learning about any of them more, please contact anybody in the instructional technology department or any of the technology staff developers. Be happy to work with you to help you implement any of these ideas in your classroom. Thanks for listening.